and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a movie. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this one or not. It's called, originally, La Muerte, Viviente, which means the living dead. It was released in the US as Snake People, or sometimes Isle of the Snake People. The reason why I say I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it is because it was actually made in 1968. So hopefully you recognize Boris Karloff there on the poster. We talked about Boris Karloff when we talked about The Cauldron of Blood, which was actually made in 1967 and released in 1970. Boris Karloff was one of the big horror actors that came out in a lot of classic Universal horror movies. As you probably know, he played Frankenstein's monster 3 times in the first 3 Frankenstein Universal films. He also played the Mummy in the original Universal Mummy, and a whole bunch of other characters. So, in 1931, he popped off as a horror big star, and he continued all the way through 1968. And in 1968, he made his 4 last movies, which are actually all Mexican. And this one is about zombies and voodoo and snakes. We get 3 kind of classic subgenres or tropes there put together. This was directed by 2 directors. Jack Hill directed Boris Karloff's scenes in Los Angeles, and Mexican director Juan Ibanez directed the whole rest of the movie. This is mainly a Mexican movie. All 4 of these movies came out through Colombia, which is so technically they're major movies, and this one was produced by Azteca, which is a Mexican production company. So I want to talk about a couple things before we get too deep into this movie. I want to talk about Jack Hill a little bit. Jack Hill, he's made a couple of movies. The biggest horror movie that Jack Hill ever did was Spider Baby. Now, this was made in 1964. It didn't come out until 1967. For whatever reason, Jack Hill would make movies and then, they wouldn't come out till later. I think it's for different reasons. But anyway, this one had Lon Chaney Jr., who is another one of the big horror stars of Universal. Of course, Lon Chaney Jr. is most famous for being the Wolfman in all the Universal Wolfman movies. He also played Dracula in Son of Dracula, or maybe he played the son of Dracula in Son of Dracula. He also played Frankenstein's monster in Ghost of Frankenstein, and a whole bunch of other roles. We talked about him in Dracula vs. Frankenstein earlier this year. So anyway, Spider Baby is interesting. So Lon Chaney is the caretaker of 3 adults who have some kind of mental problems, act like children. One of them, one of the girls, I don't know if we would say seduces or, charms people, men. And then she ends up killing them. There she is with the knife there. Also, this is an early Sid Haig film. Sid Haig, most well known in the horror community today as Captain Spaulding in House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects and 3 from Hell that Rob Zombie did. Sid Haig was in a bunch of Jack Hill movies. I didn't put all of them up here. I just put up a couple that I've actually watched. But I think Sid Haig was in the very first Jack Hill short film and appeared in many of his films after that, probably over half of them. After Spider Baby, Jack Hill made Bloodbath for AIP, and Bloodbath was about beatniks who do weird art. In the 50s and 60s, there was this beatnik movement where these artists totally rejected all mainstream culture and just did whatever they wanted, which I think is pretty cool. It's kind of weird because Roger Corman produced this, and Roger Corman did A Bucket of Blood in 1959, had almost the same plot. was about beatniks who did art, and then this one guy ends up getting dead people or dead animals and plastering over them and passing them off as sculptures. Whereas in this movie, you have a vampire who paints his victims, and he becomes a famous artist. This movie's kind of a mess. Actually, Jack Hill made the movie with no vampires at all. And then when he passed it in, or whatever, to Roger Corman, he didn't think it was very interesting, so he got this woman to spruce it up and put a vampire in it, and Jack Hill hated it. This movie wasn't that interesting. Spider Baby was really good. This one wasn't very good. Moving forward, in 1969, Jack Hill did Pit Stop, again with Sid Haig. This one is not horror, but it was awesome. It was about figure eight racing. Now, I've seen some 50s racing AIP movies with like John Ashley, and they were all right. This one's way more exciting. This one has this figure eight racing. Sid Haig is a racer, although he's not the main guy. I think the main guy is Brian Donlevy. Yeah, that's who it is for sure. Brian Donlevy. Anyway, they race in this track that looks like a figure eight, and in the intersection, if you're not careful, you're crashing at a really high speed. It's pretty exciting. Some really interesting characters, people fighting, and I don't know, this one was really good. So anyway, that was 1969. But in 1968, he made these Jack Hill made the American part of these 4 Mexican movies featuring Boris Karloff. 3 of them were also directed by Juan Ibanez. Was this one? Yeah, this one was the first one that came out, Fear Chamber. This one, Boris Karloff played a semi-mad scientist where he and his crew were in Mexico, and they found a living rock in a cave, and the rock feeds on the energy that comes out of a person when they're tortured. So it's called Fear Chamber. It was Fear Chamber. It was also called Torture Zone in some markets. Really cool poster. The quality of the movie is very poor. I'm not even talking about the acting, because I don't know if all the Mexican actors, which is pretty much all of them besides Boris Karloff, I'm not sure if they did their own English or not, or if it's dubbed. I think maybe some of them are dubbed and some of them do their own English. But like, I don't know. They really probably should have spoken their native language. I don't know. It's not very good. Also, the rock looks like it's made out of paper mache. You don't really see the whole thing all at once. You kind of just see like a surface of it. There is a mentally disabled character who is obsessed with diamonds, and I'm pretty sure the rock promises him some diamonds if he actually like feeds people to it. I think Boris Karloff was trying to say that morally they could torture people and feed the rock the energy, but he didn't want to torture them to the point where they died, but then they started doing that. Kind of a mess of a movie, kind of entertaining. I gave that one a 5 out of 10. Then we've got The Living Dead, or The Snake People. And this one is probably even more of a mess than Fear Chamber. In this one, Boris Karloff is a scientist again, which if you didn't know, like, other than Frankenstein and The Mummy and some of the really big ones, Boris Karloff played a mad scientist in so many different movies in like the 40s and 50s and late 30s. He's just like this mad scientist character, so they did it again in these movies, which is fine. And he is using voodoo to raise the dead, and in this movie, the voodoo requires ceremonies that involve snakes. So there's a lot of live snakes being used in the movie. People putting live snakes in people's beds. They definitely have a live snake actually bite a guy in the movie, in his hand. Like, you can fully see it. And anyway, you think he's just doing it so that he can use the zombies to like work in the sugarcane fields, but actually the ulterior motive is that he's using the zombies to take over the world, or he's going to. They get into the voodoo mythology of Baron Samedi, who is like a god who kind of like is related to zombies. I'm not going to pretend I know all about all the voodoo deities. I looked it up before, but I didn't like become an expert on it. So it combines the whole fear of snakes with the voodoo thing and the zombie thing. It was made in 1968, before Night of the Living Dead was made. And it didn't come out until 1971, which was a couple of years after The Night of the Living Dead came out. So I read that critics really didn't think it was very good because I think some people thought it was like a Night of the Living Dead ripoff, even though technically that can't be true because it was made first. It actually has much more in common with all of the pre-Night of the Living Dead zombie movies, which there were many of. There was I Walked with a Zombie, White Zombie, Revenge of the Zombies. I think I have seen close to 10 or 12 of the pre-Night of the Living Dead zombie movies. Almost all of them have to do with voodoo, and none of them have to do with any zombies eating people, but this one does. The zombies actually eat one or two people in this. It's not like their main thing. They're mainly like undead slaves, but they do eat people in this one. So, I don't know. It was kind of a mess. I give it a 5 out of 10. It was actually kind of hard to follow, and I've seen it twice. Boris Karloff is really good in it, but of course he's doing scenes completely separate from the rest of the movie, so that doesn't really do much for the movie. I also want to talk about 3 of the other actors. Is it going to say his name on here? Yeah. Luis Enrique Vergara. I think that's his name. No, that's not the one. It's not up here. The guy's last name is Bertrand. Oh, here. Raphael Bertrand, which Bertrand, I'm not sure. This guy is Cuban, okay? Now, I'm pointing this out because the movie's Mexican. The guy is Cuban. Obviously, they speak Spanish in both Cuba and Mexico. But the character is supposed to be French, and and the movie's in English. And in this one, they're definitely having the actual actors speak English. I don't believe this is dubbed. So this guy is a Spanish speaker, Cuban. Clearly you can see just by looking at him that he is probably of a mixed race that many Latinos are, being at least partially of native origin, okay? So he's a native Spanish speaker and speaking English in this movie with an attempt at a French accent. And I don't know, I like accents and I like looking into people's backgrounds, and it really strikes me as odd that they tried to make this character French. He plays like a military police officer who's trying to bring order to the town when there's all these zombies walking around, but he doesn't believe that they're zombies. He doesn't believe in voodoo. He thinks it's all superstition, but of course in this movie, it's actually true. It just really strikes me as funny that someone decided that the character was supposed to be French. There's no reason that the character needs to be French. He doesn't look French, and he's trying to sound French. But anyway, that is funny. Also in this movie is, and I think we would pronounce her name Julissa because she's Mexican. Looks like Julissa for English, but I think it would be Julissa. She was a very famous Mexican singer in the 60s and a prolific actress from the 60s through the 80s and beyond. Mainly the 60s through the 80s. Then it looked like her career calmed down. So she's the main woman who, I think she is Boris Karloff's niece in this movie. She was also in Fear Chamber. So they did both of those together. Oh, and this guy Carlos East was in both of them as well. He's like the local guy. I think he's a local police officer in this one. So a lot of these movies all have the same actors. Boris Karloff, Julissa, Carlos East, and all three had Jack Hill and Juan Ibanez, but all 3 made for Colombia. But this one came out in 68, and I'm pretty sure this one came out in 71. And I also want to point out this dancing woman here. It says here, Actuación Especial de Tongolele. Now, this woman is a famous Mexican dancer. She was in a bunch of movies where she usually played herself, but in this one, she plays Boris Karloff's assistant, lover. I mean, they don't kiss or anything, but she's always there when he calls for her. I think she's probably more of his assistant. And Boris Karloff, in the end, ends up revealing himself as the direct servant to the deity Baron Samedi. So I like the effort, or maybe not the effort. Maybe I like the premise, I guess I would say. It could have been cool. There's some skeletons in it. There is in the credits, they just refer to him as Midget, but he's interesting. There's this one funny scene where the Midget, I'm just using that word because that's how they credit him, he loses his glasses, and he's like wallowing around crying for his glasses. It was kind of a pathetic scene. And then in the end, he gets killed, and then the killer puts his glasses back on him. I think actually Boris Karloff kills him. He puts his glasses back on after he's dead. Anyway, I'm pretty sure another one of these 4 Mexican movies came out about a month later. This one came out, I think, in March of 71. I think the next one comes out in April of 71, so we'll talk about that later. And then the 4th one comes out in 72. So technically, I would say these are 1968 movies, but I wanted to talk about Boris Karloff. We haven't had any zombie movies on this channel at all yet. I Drink Your Blood was almost a zombie movie, but not really, because the people were just rabid. And actually, the double feature with I Drink Your Blood was I Eat Your Skin. That actually was a zombie movie, but it was made in 1964 and released in 1971. I'm not going to make another video about that, because I already talked about it in the I Drink Your Blood video. That was a voodoo zombie movie. And then also, this is our first Mexican movie on the channel, although to be fair, I was doing some research, and there is a famous Mexican character named Santo, who is a Mexican wrestler, and he did 52 movies from the 50s through maybe the 80s or maybe the 90s. And he did do at least 3 movies in 1970, and at least 1 or 2 of them had monsters in them. I tried watching them at the beginning of this project, and I think they were both in Spanish and of very poor quality, so I didn't actually do it. But now I'm thinking, to be totally complete, I probably do need to watch those at some point and throw them up here. So technically, this isn't the first Mexican horror release of the decade, because there were 2 Santo movies in 1970 that had monsters. I forget. Santo has fought vampires, beasts, monsters, mafia dudes, all sorts of people. I mean, 52 movies is insane, so I should probably try to watch those. All right, that's enough for this one. We'll see you next time.